one of the first ones that I'm here to mention, and I'm going to mention to like all 10 of them here, and then I'm going to go through the details of each. But the first one is the related to resource plans. Engagements are more manageable, and this is something that within any other tool you may understand that resource planning as at the organizational level can be done different ways. And within Microsoft Project Online or Microsoft Project Server, particularly, there's this project level planning as well as the portfolio level planning, as well as the task level planning. So I'm going to be talking about details of these differences and typical mistakes that PMOs would probably do when they're first undertaking the effort to come together and put this resource management practice in place for the PMO. And we'll talk more and more about details in more details about this. The misuse of generic resources. And this is something that usually people trying to leverage generic resources, non-generic resources, roles, and how do we deal with that, and what's the best practice, and typical mistakes that people do when they basically repurpose or misuse the generic resources. We're going to talk about the examples and examples of this. Number 3 would be these capacities overestimated. So the capacity meaning like how much time do we have, or how much time does a particular resource has over the course of the time, over the period of time. So we will talk about the different calendars, how do we apply different calendars, like we'll talk about the so-called max units. In terms of Microsoft Project, there's going to be max units that we're going to be talking about, and how do we time phase this. The whole time phasing concept is also important here. Again, maybe I maybe talk about this very conceptually without details, but trust me, we're gonna dive into these details as soon as I'm finished with number 10 here. So number 4 is unlocked actuals and remaining work in the past. So these are the problems. These are the real problems, mistakes. Having the actuals, being, going wild, if you will, and having remaining work in the past, things like that. So we're going to talk about these type of mistakes. Number 5, misleading supply versus demand data. So a lot of times when you have all the PMs and all the projects are filled with resources, you think everything is good, everything is accurate, and once you aggregating this data in some kind of histogram where you would put this into a report, it doesn't make sense, right? So we're going to talk about what are the typical what is the typical reason why some of these histograms are really not reflecting the reality. Why can't you connect the dots between this report and reality? We're going to talk about that too. Number 6, resource units versus resource max units confusion. And again, this is probably because of the terminology and different things and different words that are mentioned in different places. We're going to break it down and kind of understand, to avoid this confusion. But this confusion really leads to a lot of mistakes down the road. Number 7, resource leveling frustration. And we've been pronouncing many times while we do the consulting work with our customers, saying, hey, leveling is not really giving you a lot of value. However, people are frustrated. This whole feature is there. It's kind of nice and cool. You can do it, but what is the real practical application of that leveling? That's something that is tricky. So we'll break it down. We'll look at the details. We'll look at the typical issues, and basically, fundamentally, we'll look at the reason why it's doing what it's doing. So you can quickly reverse engineer whatever happens after you leveled and understand what happened. So no frustration. Hopefully, will go after will happen after we go through this. Number 8, resources on summer tasks. Very straightforward, very simple mistake, but yet people are still doing this, and there are some reasons why you may want to do that, but in reality, in 99% of the cases, you don't want the resources on the summer tasks, and I will explain you why. I'll explain you why. So a lot of times when we say, hey, this is the best practice to do this and this, but I'll explain why this is the best practice, it doesn't make much sense. So we will explain why we should not do that. Number 9, complexity of multiple resources per task. Well, again, I don't want to say that, I don't want to, by any means, I don't want to say that, you know, I don't recommend to have multiple resources per task. But I'm just saying that when you do that, you need to make sure that your level of expertise using them as project is higher than average, because this may incur additional complexity when you deal with assignments, and each assignment starts and finish dates and actuals and things like that. So there's a lot of, you know, the level of complexity basically, you know, quadruples when you add multiple resources to tasks. So make sure that you have yourself equipped with all kinds of skills to manage these type of tasks. And again, I'm not saying I don't even saying this is a bad practice. I'm just saying this is a typical mistake. Oops, hold on a second. This is a typical mistake when people are having multiple resources per task. And then mighty earned value analysis, huh? So the earned value analysis is something that very much tied to resources, very much tied to cost, particularly for Microsoft Project. So we would break it down and understand what are those typical mistakes people do or don't do that preventing them from doing successful resource management. I'm sorry, the earned value management analysis. So we'll talk about that. And also, I'm taking this taking the liberty of using my pen here, and I'm going to be doing some kind of live whiteboarding during the session. So so that's going to be my first time. So bear with me if I'm not going to be very quick on that. Anyway, so these are the 10. So let's go and break it down. Okay. Number 1, resource plans / engagements are more manageable. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is there are different based on Microsoft Project Server and earlier versions. There's this feature called resource plans. In the newer versions, starting from 2016 or Project Online, there's a resource engagements feature that allows you to book your resources or plan resources at the project by project level, as opposed to well-known, you know, task by task level. So this is, just start using my pen here. So here on the left side, just put in this arrow here. Works. So these are so this is the default interface of Microsoft Project Online to have those engagements. This is like additional UI that we can have as part of the tools from Trusted IT Group. But anyway, this is the concept of having engagements at the project level. So basically, this is where you say, I want this particular resource to work on this project for 3 months at the 50% of his rate. And then you just kind of fill out these folks, fill out these users, fill out those resources, and fill up their plates, basically, until you see that, you know, you can build this organizational demand of those resources. You can also assign some of the work to some of the operational activities, saying that, you know, 20% of these people, 20% of their work of their day for these people will be dedicated to support, right? And you can account for that as well. So this is kind of not at the project by project level. here is the second option. So this is number one, this is number two, and number two is very much known for everybody else who are not familiar with the project online or project server, who are just familiar with the Microsoft project, is that these are the tasks and these are the resources, right? So you assign your tasks, you assign the resources to those tasks, and that kind of builds up that demand. So the mistake that people do is and let me just bring another slide. The mistake that people do that they mix those levels of engagement and then put them into one piece of information, into one data set. Let me just break it down further. So you see this pyramid here, and here at the lower level we have this project schedule where we can build those resources at the project level. At the high level we have the master program schedule, or here we say here's the plan. Plan at the project level, plan at the program level. Here, even I would say plan at the project / task level, right? So there's plan project / task level. Here's at the higher level, we can plan at the program or portfolio level, and finally here at the plan at the organizational level. This is really where these reports of resource, plan and demand and resource balancing is really looked at and saying this is where you come to the senior leadership meeting or steering committee and say, hey, our pipeline of project is overblown. We don't have that many resources, and this is where you need to have this consistent information. And this consistent information usually looked at this high level. No one is really going down to those details at the task level. So here, at this level of tasks and assignments, there's not much of an interest as far as the organizational value of providing this information at the high level anyway. So what I'm trying to say here is this. Having these beautiful colors here describing the yellow is better, the red is not so good, meaning that, and overall, this line here, over here, right? You see this axle here? Consistency and resource data quality. What I'm trying to say here is resources forecasting can be done at one level. You cannot mix, let's say this is level 3, this is level 2, this is level 1. You can't have the resources presented and rolled up at the organizational level at any two of these levels. It's got to be only at one level. And guess what? When you're trying to pull these resources from just this very bottom level, you need to have all projects, entire project portfolio, very consistent and very accurate as far as your assignments for all these tasks. So here what we are saying is really you can get this consistency, you can get more quality data at the higher level where you have those engagements or resource plans. And therefore, what we're saying, the resource plans engagements are more manageable and accurate, and that's the typical fundamental resource management planning mistakes. I do want you to kind of either write down or memorize or somehow pin down those questions that you may have at the moment. We will have 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to go through those questions, but feel free to kind of pin down those questions and then we can definitely address them in regards to the resource plans / engagements versus planning at the assignment and task level. Okay. Whew. Well, that was it's quite a big topic, and I'm gonna zip through the others pretty quickly because we don't have much time. Misuse of generic resources, and here's the very simple concept. So we have this bucket of generic resources. Here's this bucket, right? All the generic resources, we have different resource, project manager, generic resource, like resource manager, generic resource, and things like that, right? And we also have these named resources: Joe, Mike, Jenny, all kinds of people, all kinds of resources that are also broke down as, different roles, right? The key is this. The mistake is this. When you have a representative bucket of generic resources and you have representative bucket of named resources, these resources should be equal to each other. Their capacities should be equal, meaning that if you have, let's say, 10 project managers, right, you would need to have a representative PM generic resource with the capacity of 10 people. The same thing for other roles. So all the resources, all the named resources should fall into the respective generic resource bucket, and this generic resource bucket should have the appropriate size as the number of those actual named resources. Meaning that if we have one generic resource, generic resource, and we have called PM. Let's just say PM, right? PM, and we have in the actual named resources we have 10 PMs. So the capacity of that generic resource should be 10 times one person, which is 10 times 1 times 100% of the units, which would be obviously 1,000% of the capacity of the generic resource. That would be equal to 10 PMs in the named resources. Well, sorry for this drawing, but that's the idea. Okay. So again, and then basically, I just drew over my text here. Anyway, but switching from generic resources to named resources should be done for all resources. So meaning that when you have a project and you have a template and you have all generic resources in there, you got to switch to those actually named resources in one shot. This will give you one-to-one correlation between generic resources and named resources. Anyway, let's just kind of move through others a little bit quicker, and we can have a little bit more of some of the clicking and demoing some of these features here on the MS project. Capacity is overestimated. Here's basically the information about the capacity and the different calendars, and we're looking at taking into account some of the organizational, downtime. It's known that the Christmas week is not really a productive week, or we know that we have different calendar. We have blackout dates and Thanksgiving and others. So having all this information into account is very much valuable to account for those capacities. But what the mistake is that usually in most of the cases, there is no 100% of any resource available to do the project work. So people are also doing all kinds of managerial work. People also do all kinds of administrative work. So accounting for 100% of any person's time for the project is basically almost misleading. So we had the cases when the max units were brought down to 80% or 60% available time for any project work. So something like capacities are overestimated. This is a very common mistake. Unlocked actuals and remaining work in the past. So here's where we have the situation when we have all our tasks, and all our tasks we have progress. Let me just pick up a different color. We have the progress of different tasks, and so let's say this is today's date. So when you have this gap of actuals that are not been filled out, first of all, you need to be able to push it out on the schedule. Second of all, you need to be able to lock these actuals. And the reason for this is this. well, in my words here, the locked actuals avoiding PMs to accidentally create artificial actuals in the future. So if for some reason, let me just actually switch this to a project schedule so I can show it to you on actual project schedule. Here's the project schedule and a typical Gantt chart. If I would say that this is a today's date, somewhere in February 27th, and I accidentally say that this entire section is complete, let me just say and complete this. So what I just accidentally did, I just created actuals in the future, which is absolutely misleading. I can't put any actuals in the future. I mean, obviously tool allows you to do that, but that's why this is a mistake, where the tool is allowing you to do that. Also, remaining work in the past needs to be rescheduled. So when I do have some, let me just undo this, 0% complete. Let's have just only one task completed here, this one first. And then, with my percent complete is here. So I have completed this one task. I have this particular task, number 3, right? Has the remaining work that is incomplete, right? So what I need to do, I really need to push this forward and reschedule the remaining work, which means that if I don't do that, it creates this what I would call unaccounted debt of the resource. So this work still needs to be done, but if you don't push this forward, meaning that this work remains in the past, and a lot of reports would use the current date as a status date, which means that this debt can be accumulated, and all these dependencies are not going to be accounted for. So instead of sitting like this, I would have to use in the tool, the so-called tool to update the project. Let me just second. Just with this. Project, yeah, update the project. So here I can say reschedule uncompleted work to start after 10/27. So reschedule uncompleted work, which is remaining work. I'm going to push this. This would push this all the way after 27th, which is the 28th, and these are ramifications of rescheduling this. You see, all these items here down below have changed because of that particular act, and that's something that very commonly people don't do. And accumulating this debt in the past of the remaining work is a very common mistake. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Misleading supply versus demand data. So, and we briefly already talked about this, but basically the information that is coming from either resource plans or the engagements or the task assignments needs to be really consistent, and preferably needs to be at the same level. There's different ways you can restrict or enforce this in the tool, but basically the process should really be driving this. And let me show you one trick in MS Project that kind of tells where the supply and demand data should come from. Well, primarily the demand data. And here in the project, you have this project information button. On the project tab, there's a project information button where you have this drop down, say calculate resource utilization, which is the resource demand from, and here's the options. We have the project plan, which means that all the demand for this, from this project is going to be calculated based on the assignments on this project, on these tasks. The other option is the resource engagements. So basically, the demand information is going to be driven off of those resource engagements. And I do believe and I do recommend take a look at the resource engagements, because at the enterprise level, this is much easier to manage, it is much more consistent, much easier to fix if anything needs to be fixed, and much easier to build the data. Or you have an option to do this, to drive this information from project plan until a certain date. So you may have certain planning done within your Microsoft schedule, Microsoft project schedule, until a certain date, after which you would like to have this information to come from the resource engagements. So this option can say, well, I have the planning done in my schedule very well until, let's say, end of March, right? And after the, starting from April 1st, look at the engagement information to drive the demand. Okay, so these are the options that people usually don't take into account, but this is very important as far as supply and demand. And very important when you look at this information in MS Project Online or Project Server, this is the exact information that is driven off of that very switch of these very options. Again, if you select the option number 1, which is project plan, this is where the information is driven off of those actual assignments to these tasks. Okay. All right. Let's move to the next one. This would be resource leveling frustration. And this is where I wanted to actually show this in the tool and break it down for you so you can easily understand why it's doing what it's doing. So particularly if I just create a new project, this is going to be easier to explain on a very new project. So let's say I have this task 1 and I have task 2. And I make it all auto-scheduled, so I do have this information like start and finish dates. Let's make it 5 days each. 5 days each, and I'm going to assign a resource. I'm going to assign Alex here, and Alex here. All right. So now, obviously, because I assigned Alex for these 2 periods, I have this whole thing is over allocated, and the reason for this is just save this, and say this is a demo leveling object. All right, so here's this the leveling section. Here's another resources, the whole leveling section. First of all, we can look at the leveling options. You can level the entire project, or you can level a particular resource. If you look at the resource sheet is going to tell me that I have instead of Alex, I should probably pick a resource from the resource pool. Let me do that. This will drive the over allocation metrics here. I'm hearing some bits. If there are any questions while I'm doing this, feel free to Dan. Would you address any questions if there are any in the chat window? I just not be able to monitor the chat window so far. Adam Smith. Oh yeah, obviously I just put them into the wrong window. So I'm here and saying Alex. Okay, and now I can see that this resource is over allocated resources. So now if I go and click on the level button, what this will do, this will push this task so it's to avoid that over allocation. So basically, the key reason why it's doing this is this, leveling delay. So leveling delay is the only field that is basically really touching or assigning any value to this. And when it's doing this, it's taking into several options, and this is where we can look at the leveling options for the leveling. So first of all, automatic versus manual. So we basically saying, day by day. So it's going to look at our over allocations on either day by day or week by week or hour by hour. So day by day is usually the default option, but realistically, all these options would be able to take into account when it's doing this, and also taking into account the you can do this for the entire project, or you can do this for a selected period of time, or you can also do this for a selected tasks, or you can do it for a selected resource. But the idea is that it's really creating this value here, saying it's 7 days delay in the task. If you mouse over this, it will give you more explanation of what it's doing. But it basically, changing this parameter to and adding those dates, making a delay for the task, which is avoiding the resource over allocation. So you can do this by this. We can do this by the resource. So you can also, if you do it by resource, this is going to do the same thing. But again, if you'd like to clear some of these items, some of this leveling, you can just switch to one of these values here and then zero it out. And this would remove the overallocation, remove the leveling effect. Okay. I don't. Let's see if we have any questions about this. But one of the key points here is leveling is still better than creating constraints. And if we do have questions about this, we can go over the constraints versus leveling. But like to move on to the next topic. Resources are on summary tasks. On summary tasks are headers and contain rollup information and double count of calculated data. So these are the mistakes. If I go to my project that I just created, I insert one more task here and say, I'm going to create this summary task. This is summary task. I'm going to push this under that task, which is going to create the summary task. And if I do, so I have 5 days duration and I have work. If I look at how many hours this task involves, so 5 days each, 40 hours, one task, 40 hours, another task, total 80 hours. If I put the resource, add the summary level, what it's going to do is going to add additional hours to this bucket, basically. So overall, now it's 120 hours. So basically, this creates this double counting. And by having resources on summary task, it's basically incorrect way, and roll-up information will unlikely be accurate. So that's something that you may want to avoid. All right, the complexity of multiple resources per task, and I'm going to briefly discuss and show this in the MS project. I know we're running out of time, and I do want to cover earned value and the questions. So here, when we have multiple resources per task, let's say I'm going to add Alex, I'm going to add Mike, I'm going to add Julie here, and I'm going to basically do this for that as well. Other tasks, the task here. And I'm going to switch to the view that's called resource usage, or let's say the task usage. So some of you may not be able to get to this view, or may not may not be able to acknowledge that this creates the different assignments, and especially this different assignments has these different dates. And if I start applying some actuals, especially actual start or actual finish, just add actual finish here. So actual start and actual finish, you may have different values for this different assignment. So Alex may say, I have actually started this, on the 28th, I have started this on the 13th, and see already it's given me some kind of issue, some kind of warning saying that, hey, well, you're saying you started this assignment on the 13th, but the actual task was on the 28th. So do you want to move this? This is before the project start date, right? So do you want to continue this or not? So this is already creating this additional complexity what you need to deal with when you're having multiple tasks, multiple resources per task, which also complicates the whole time phasing, and complicates the control over the information and per each task. But yeah, the project is capable of doing this. This is very much in use for a lot of companies, and I know a lot of cases where it's been very much in use, and but it just required a little bit more skilled PMs to be able to do this within MS project. Okay. All right. I'm going to move to the next one, and earned value, and this is we're going to quickly show you how you can enable some of these calculations. If I go to and basically here's the needs resource with cost. It needs the baseline cost, which is the baseline. If you just say the baseline, this will give you the cost too, if you do have resources with cost. And then I just need the status date. And I've learned recently that you may even not have the status date, which by default it will take today's date. Anyway, so here's our project. And we'll be following the best practice not to have assignments on the summary task. I'll just have assignments here. So that's great. I'm going to go to my resource sheet, and I'm going to add some of these, add some of the hour estimates to some of these assignments. So I'm going to say this is going to be, and since most of the earned value metrics, well, some of the earned value metrics are actually relative indexes. So for that purposes, if you're planning to use only those like CPI or SPI, you may just have a $1 cost per hour. But in this case, let's just say we're gonna have $100 an hour. So our resource has $100 an hour. I'm gonna add $100 an hour for Alex, Mike, and Julie. I'm going back here. So let's actually bring up some of those earned value metrics, which is going to be very popular schedule performance indicator. Another one would be the cost performance indicator. Let's just bring maybe some of the baseline cost of work performed, which is the earned value. And let's say bring the baseline cost of work scheduled, right? So zeros across the board, right? How do we enable this, right? How do we actually create these calculations? So in order to create these calculations, we need to remember number 2 on this board. So now we have cost. Now let's add the baseline, right? Let's add the baseline. So we're going to add the baseline, and by clicking on project, set the baseline, setting the baseline, set the baseline for the entire project. Okay. Voila, right? Right now we have baseline cost of work scheduled. So it tells us what is it, the amount of work, what is the value of the work that is scheduled. And obviously our CPI and SPIs are zeros, and the reason is that we need the status date. So let's look at the status date and say, let's say the status date is today. So as of 27th, we're expected to, I see it's been pushed. It did push this task a little further. So on the 27th, 26th, 25th, 27th, and this is just today. So we have not accomplished anything. So what we need to do is to report some progress. And if there would be a perfect world, we can always say, hey, mark these tasks that I selected, right? Mark these tasks that I selected, mark this on track. So this would report the progress as if it was performed as scheduled. So I click on this. This will give us perfect scenario. Indexes are 1 across the board. So the cost of work performed equal the cost of work scheduled means this is a perfect world, right? Well, let's just say if we actually have not done, let me just undo this, right? Undo. And if I say we just did, 75% of the work, then now even the 75% given us this metrics. But basically, what I'm trying to say, if you would have the entire schedule lined up and have these 3 things lined up, again, the resource cost, doesn't matter if it's $1 or $10 or $50, it's going to change these numbers, but relative metrics like CPI and SPI would be able to calculate, as well as the baseline and the status date, and your earned value metrics are going to be calculated automatically within MS Project.